that's how that works.
I already did it at 2 o'clock this afternoon, so you guys can ask questions.
So, yes, again, standard spiel. Hi, welcome to the Talkback for Goblin Market. I'm Rebecca, the director. This is Sarah. This is Carson. Sarah obviously was in the show. Carson did the choreography. And this is the concluding show of our 2018 to 2019 season, Making a World, which is themed around escapism and fantasy, and in a number of different ways of exploring that theme. This is the most overtly fantasy genre of all of them, but also I think really gets into why we tell stories, whether or not they're stories about fantasy and magic. And the reason we have the talkbacks is because as a company we do primarily classic work, and I think it's really good to connect with an audience about what is the ongoing relevance of the work that we're doing. We're not just doing it because it's old and prestigious, we're doing it because we can get continued meaning and continued connection out of it in our time. I think that's sort of what theater is. You have to have a reason for doing it because every production is a new thing. Man, there was so much energy in the house tonight. Yeah. It was really great. Yeah, I guess if you don't mind, let me ask the first question.
I'm sure.
Of you, what's having that, like all that feedback and all that audience presence and response like?
It was pretty awesome. Of course, I mean, as anybody that's gone to live theater knows, the audience is just as participatory as the people on stage. It's a very interactive experience. So having a large crowd tonight and all that energy was really great. I think for us and for them. So I don't know. That's kind of that's a fair response. No, yeah. I think the point about theater being participatory is really important, and about theater being live and about sharing space, which is something I think is really interesting in this show, because the whole idea of this adaptation of the poem is that it's all a memory or reenactment of the events that are taking place within this room, within this nursery that they lived in at the time. So I think that's a really good point that you hit on about the audience participation and all being in the same space with the story, because I think that's something that this adaptation really plays to. So I guess I'll throw a question out to the audience. Did you have any questions, or did you have favorite parts, questions about the process, or about what the show meant? It means, oh god, this poem has had so many interpretations over time, and I'm curious about your questions or impressions or favorite parts.
Yeah, can we do that last one? Like, what does the poem mean to you? I know what it means to, I know what my 1 sentence summary would probably be, but question for everybody, what would you sum it up as if you had to be like, 1 sentence summary go?
Oh dang.
Well, do you have
done this in a sentence.
Yeah, I haven't done it in a sentence either. I've done it in many sentences. I can talk for so long about this show.
It doesn't have to be one.
Well, okay, I guess I'll fall on that sword and do it first. Like I said, this has had a lot of adaptations, and I think the fact that this adaptation does the frame story of the sisters returning to their childhood home and remembering the events makes me foreground really the question of what the goblins mean to the sisters. When I was initially pitching this for grant money, so some of the phrasing that I used was like, what does it mean to play the villain for someone else so that they can conquer and grow stronger and fight their villains. But we really ended up leaning into the idea that being the goblins is something that the sisters get something out of. Again, because in this adaptation, it's just the two of them who also play the goblins. So I guess the way we ended up talking about it, I think someone brought up shadow self as an idea. I don't remember if it was you or Sophie, but the idea that the goblins represent something that the sisters can be or can have. It's not the fruit so much as the ability to be really weird when you're a woman in Victorian England, or travel, or be powerful. So that's something that's as hard to give up as the fruit itself. So that's me.
Yeah. I mean, I never had to read this in school. I never did any I never wrote anything about it. I hadn't even read it before we started working on this. one of the things that really stands out to me is how, like, the horrifying idea that, like, you get curious and give into temptation once and you die. Like, that's it for you. But, like,
insert sex ed teacher in Mean Girls here.
yeah.
Because you were that pregnant and died.
But then also the idea that, like, because Laura doesn't die, like, there is still hope after that, whether, like, you need somebody to, like, pull you out of that or whatever, if you were able to do it by yourself. But, like, even though there is that sort of premise, I really like that that's not, like, the final word on it.
Yeah, I would say I kind of felt like what Carson, what you were saying at first, like I remember having this discussion with you about, like, wait, so my character makes these choices and then she's condemned for them. I kind of felt like that's bull. I was like, that's not okay. But then you really helped me when you said, like, well, the qualities of my character, she's curious, she's a risk taker, she's an adventurer, she wants to see more in life, and those are not necessarily, for a woman perhaps in Victorian times, that might have been seen as not a great quality to have, but actually it's a fine quality to have. It's okay to be curious about your world and willing to take risks. And you were saying, like, if you were talking about a captain of an army in a Victorian time period, willing to take risks and be adventurous and being curious about your surroundings would be extremely important qualities to have. So it's just, and that's how we got talking about the shadow self, like being able to explore that side of herself, being represented through the goblins. And I kind of took it that way.
Yeah. No, I think the character stuff we did with you was really deep and really neat. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about how there is hope in the end, because I mean, among the many interpretations, obviously there's the sexual or sensual interpretation where if you have sex, you will get pregnant and you will die. Again, to quote Mean Girls, which is very quotable. But yeah, I think in terms of the interpretation relating to sex and sexuality and gender, I do think the theme of sisters relying on each other and women relying on each other is really meaningful in this play. Getting a little more into sort of political or verging on political themes. Again, when I was doing the grant application, I started describing, like, what some of the sort of relevant themes that I saw in the adaptation, and one of them was about the being able to speak about a traumatic thing that happened to you years later. And I'm like, oh, I'm not doing this on purpose, guys. I'm not, like, making a false bid for relevance here. This is really what it's about. Don't hate me. But yeah, we had an audience member the other day who, like, specifically brought up the Me Too relevance of being able to finally talk about stuff that happened to you, and being able to not even to, like, put it firmly in your past, but to get peace from having other people know about it. And again, I was not trying to do, like, a more relevant now than ever, like someone is always going to do in theater when they're trying to sell you something. But I was writing about it, like, oh, I've accidentally written my pitch into Goblin Market #MeToo, and it makes sense with this adaptation. Oops.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah. So yeah, that happened. The adaptation is kind of about that in a way. But yeah, there obviously have been many interpretations of the poem, and also the adaptation itself also opens itself up to a number of interpretations. So yeah, you mentioned you had a sentence long what Goblin Market means to me. So
men are horrible and will hurt you, and girls, if you must love one another.
Good quote. Yes. Good valid quote.
I mean, my interpretation is not necessarily fair, but that's what I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, many interpretations of this poem, I would say, are valid. I think that stands up. yeah, I guess what's your interpretation, or what's your view of whether or not the adaptation holds up in that regard?
Yeah, it absolutely does. I was just thinking along the lines of what you just said, Carson. I was just thinking the poem for me, and I would say this production as well, avoids going to the Madonna war complex thing, excuse me for using the phrase, and I was wondering if you all felt that way as well, like it manages to always be, it never falls into the this is a good girl, this is a bad girl for me. Did any of you have opinions about that?
I guess honestly, it never occurred to me to do it that way, which maybe is, you know, my failure as an interpreter to not think of it and then reject it. But it just wasn't really on my radar to portray Laura as the bad girl and Lizzie as the good girl.
I mean, I was surprised that I didn't get that from the original poem. I was like, how can this be a Victorian writer be so nuanced as to be like this character has had the food equivalent of sex and is not therefore being we are not therefore being invited to watch her be punished.
But maybe part of that's because it's written by a woman?
Yeah.
And not written by a man.
Ooh.
I'm sorry. Like, we escape the trope because it's a woman
Well,
writing.
I will always put in a plug for Thomas Hardy, as Victorian writers who do better at that go.
Tess, though, no.
No, Tess, exactly. No, because the whole thing with Tess is that she is not like portrayed as a worse person. She's portrayed as a victim, which like we can talk about agency, but I don't think he portrays her as someone who's a bad person. And Angel is totally a hypocrite.
He's disgusting.
He's the worst.
Yes.
Tessa the D'Urberville's is very depressing. Gotcha. But I think it is feminist. I know we kind of talked earlier in the talkback about our favorite parts. Did you have favorite parts of the show? It's always interesting to hear what people especially liked, or what people especially didn't like. What gave you problems? I mean, I guess we're kind of talking about problems thematically, but.
Given that you were working on a rare stage, repeatedly having characters sprint back and forth to show that they were going through a difficult bit of country or woodland or a maze or a confusing, disturbing area at night, came off really well.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah.
I think the changes in tempo were exceptional.
Yeah.
I thought that they kept the audience really engaged and it, in your facial expressions.
People keep talking about like you're doing all this stuff to make your face a goblin face.
Oh,
That's so
the
cool.
whole thing was fun, but I really particularly loved the changes in tempo. And I know you guys worked really, really closely with the music, and I thought that you really nailed it.
Oh, thank you.
I had a friend in the audience tonight who I guess had to bail and get back to Boston, but who played the cello in the production of this that I had seen in college. And I really want to pick her brain about it because I remember some of the differences, most notably in my memory that if I remember correctly, the sisters used masks in that production when they were playing the goblins, but I was very interested from the start in just doing it through physicality, which I think again played into the stuff about being the goblins that is meaningful for the sisters, that it's not a separate role. Whereas if we had gone with the sort of other idea that I mentioned, where there's a way in which it's helpful for you to play the villain for your sister to defeat, so that she can grow stronger. Then if we had gone with that, then maybe something like masks would have been more helpful.
Right.
But I think the way that we did it was definitely through physicality, which was developed by Carson and by the actors, all of the different animal goblins. As described, some as described in the text of the poem, some just because this is a cool animal.
Like the octopus. There's no octopus in the poem.
Yeah.
I just wanted one.
That's cool. I really like your comment about the one line, especially what you said about women needing to be friends with each other, because I find that we, or at least I feel like I kind of grew up in a society where that's not always the case or the message. Competition is the message, so it was kind of cool to hear you say that, because I do feel like with the actors, so I feel like we really worked on that connection of like being supportive of each other, and
Yeah.
that came through. So.
Yeah, I think you guys work together really well. And I also, so the sequence of them getting the stuff out of the toy box and playing or pretending games. That was totally developed by the actors. I basically threw a bunch of stuff in a box and was like, play pretend, guys. So
That's fun.
I like that it developed into a story about Lizzie being a knight errant, basically, because that's kind of what the story is later too.
Yeah.
So I really like how that little microcosm of the story. I like the last couple of lines of the show, and I believe it's also the last couple of lines of the poem. To cheer one on the tedious way, to fetch one if one goes astray, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. I really, really like that last one because it's not just about rescuing someone when they're in trouble, it's also about just supporting them continuously. I think that's really nice. Any other questions about the adaptation or the production process, or don't ask us what we're doing next because it's still a surprise.
Your characters did a beautiful job with emotion and development of being full circle. Both Leslie and Laura, beautiful.
Yeah, I really liked how they started with the sister song, and then that was what got them back together again, and got her back. It just is like you start from the beginning and you see that they came to reminisce, and you got it all the way through. It was just a really nice flow. It had a great flow to it, and they just blended in and out of their characters seamlessly, and you could really tell when they were in one or the other. And when one had to switch back to being Lizzie, and the other one stayed in the Goblin, and vice versa, it was very smooth, and it just really.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a moment of, which one are they playing right now?
Yeah.
I think you guys make it really
And of course the lighting helped too, but their characterization really crystallized, I thought.
But that, I think that all came from working with these two because we really spent a lot of time on improving Goblin movements and then harnessing them and deciding, what this specific animal, because a lot of animals have a lot of similar traits and movements. So being like, when I'm a rat, I'm specifically doing this thing.
What is the essence of rat?
And at first it felt like, I won't say it felt a little silly. I was like, the essence of rat? And then I was like, the more we went along, it really, in the long run, it really paid off to spend that time doing that. So that was genius, I think, on their part. So.
One thing I really liked having you do, and we didn't do it a whole lot, but was count 5 and go back to your human characters, but we'll remember what being that goblin felt like. It only happened a couple of times, but I thought that was really interesting, what you guys pulled out of that.
Yeah, I think that also sort of plays into what are the goblins in our production.
Yeah,
That's neat. Yeah, I kind of forgot that we had done that.
Adaptation question. I was curious that there were songs that I wasn't expecting because they're not from the poem, so how would I know? And at one point, Laura and Lindsay play a game with the song Two Sisters, which ends with them fighting about who is prettier. That was that was a weird and jarring note. Why do you think that's in there?
If I had to take a shot at it, I guess that I would say because they're sisters, and having 5 sisters myself, I adore all of my sisters. But I think it's a human quality to, like I was saying, it's really all awesome to be we're supporting each other and everything, but to deny that there's the human aspect of just natural competition between people that exists. So I think showing it's not always peace and love and flowers and happiness. We're gonna have some moments where I do this better than you. You know what I mean? Anything you can do, I can do better. Kind of I don't know.
I do have a slightly more concrete answer for that, which is that
okay.
I'm not the one. Okay. So that piece is an existing classical piece. It's by Brahms, and the final verse of that most of the English lyrics that are in this one are fairly direct translations of the German lyrics in the Brahms piece, except that in the final verse, after we sew a single sampler, we sleep in the very same bed, we love the same man, which is not relevant to this show. So I guess this was a change that was a little more relevant, or at least a little less irrelevant to this show.
I had no idea what any of that. I don't know the classical
Yeah, that and also Mouth So Charmful, Sarah's solo are existing classical pieces.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. No idea.
Yeah, I think they fit in really well.
Yeah. It's kind of fun to get to sing some art song in the middle of a musical. It's like something I haven't had the opportunity to do before, so.
Yeah, it is very classical in style though. I think
Yeah.
it fits in very
Oh
well.
yeah, absolutely.
But on an in-story level, it keeps them from being psychotically sweet all the time.
I think so, right?
Yeah.
Would you, I don't know, that's my take on it. It makes it more real.
Yeah, I think
like,
there's-
we're, you know, like, cause siblings are siblings, you know, at some point.
That seems fair.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm hesitating to say this because this video is going to be on our YouTube occasionally, or eventually I should say. But my sister is just finishing law school this year, and I'm like slightly upset, and I'm like, she's the academic intellectual one. When did that happen? No, it's me.
You're also the academic intellectual one. It is both of you.
But she's gonna be a lawyer.
Well,
Don't
but you
that's
chose
true.
different paths.
Don't put your box.
You should
Don't fall into
Well,
boxes.
what I'm saying is, like, I think that's something that makes a lot of sense, even for your sister, who you would love and rescue from
Yeah,
goblins.
Yeah.
Any final questions? Any final statements? Thank you for coming.